Welcome to the podcast episode. I'm very honored to have two stalwarts in our industry and community who are here and who have graciously accepted my invite to join today on this very important topic of CMMI and CMMC harmonization. Happy to have Ron Lear. Ron, thanks for joining. Ron is the Vice President of Models and Frameworks at ICYMI CMMI Institute. Been there in the industry for very long and has been at the helm of defining where CMMI is going next, has been part of CMMC program when it started. Kevin Shah with Business Transformation Institute, BTI, has also been in the CMMI and CMMC program for long. And everyone that knows Kevin, he's been there for more than 35 years in the industry, specifically CMMI and now CMMC since day one. So there's a few of us that have been in both CMMI and CMMC, like you guys know, and we're fortunate to be one of the few that have seen both sides of it.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting us to be here today. Very much appreciate it. CMMI and CMMC both share a common origin history in terms of where they were both first developed through Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, who had people involved in both activities. The DoD hired them in both cases. There's a shared nomenclature. There's a lot of shared language. The maturity level approach, while they differ, they're similar. They're based on a lot of the same thing. The tiered levels, what does 1, 2, 3, very similar. Big differences in some other ways in terms of the focus, right? They both have their own separate focus. CMMI is a broader footprint around overall business capability and processes. CMMC is focused specifically on that federal controlled information and controlled unclassified information portion of cybersecurity and the systems that either transport, create, or store that information. And they do have overlap. Both of the models can be done in a complementary fashion. That's what we've been hearing from a lot of organizations. And even the CMMI assessment process, or CAP as they call it, Kevin and I were co-authors on the original version of that document. So you'll still see our names there, and you'll see that there's a lot of commonality in how the assessment process is run. Yes, there are differences. Yes, currently we don't have reciprocity. That could change in the future. CMMI is able to keep up a little bit more because we don't have the legislative burden to go through. So I think there's a lot of benefit for both of those models to be done in that harmonized and integrated fashion that we're talking about today.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ron. How do you think organizations can really operationally integrate these in terms of some of the commonality? We see maturity level, we see the word maturity level, we see domains, we see lots of common things between the two models. How can an organization avoid duplication of effort, so to speak? And in what respects do you see that, Kevin?
So there's several areas that they can leverage the CMMI model in particular. So if your background is CMMI, you're familiar with what a documented process or a recorded process is, whether that's in an automated tool or it's in some sort of documentation or web-based. And you understand what it means to be able to identify things, document it, make sure you're doing version control, and make sure that you have repeatability in your process and it's performed consistently. When you look at the CMMC, in version 1, that was explicitly also called out, back to Ron's point about it looked very similar since SCI built it. But in version 2, they did something a little, I call it sneaky, in that they stripped that away on the surface, but they embedded it in the objectives under the controls. So when you look at those controls and you start looking at each objective per requirement, what you see is it's usually there's an identify objective, which means you have to have it documented somewhere or recorded. And then there's a show me you're doing it. And then it's being able to demonstrate or test it, which in CMMI language, we think about show and tell and being able to do that. So from that perspective, very similar. If they take that approach and you look at the CMMI model and you compare it with the 14 domains, and I'll just give you 3 as a quick example. Right? Configuration management in CMMI is broader than CMMC, but CMMC has a domain for configuration management. It's the same process, it's just different configuration items. Yeah. Another one, incident response, very important in CMMC, very important in CMMI. If you look at what the CMMI model asks for, it's asking for the same things almost identically that CMMC is asking for.
Yeah.
And the last one is risk assessment. Pretty easy. If you have a risk program in place based on CMMI, all you're doing for CMMC is making sure you're adding the security elements into that risk process. But the risk process from CMMI is much more robust than what you see in CMMC.
Yeah.
If you try to tackle these, and this is the same, we used to talk about the quagmire of standards.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that Ron and I and you have been recommending to folks for years. Build one quality management system, whether you base it on ISO, CMMI, whatever. And then as you bring these other standards and models in, just add to that process set. Don't keep recreating the wheel. I just literally had a customer a couple weeks ago that I'm consulting with for CMMC preparation, and they were telling me how onerous it is to try and maintain all these separate standards. And I said, don't integrate them. Risk management in CMMI, risk management in ISO, risk management in CMMC, process-wise, all the same. The difference is, what elements am I looking at? So those are easy examples. And if you take that approach, they knit together very well. I mean, you can sit there I can pretty much off the top of my head and map all 14 domains straight into CMMI.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. Thank you for that. Very good point. I think, the one thing that comes to my mind is also about how we have expanded CMMI beyond software development, as Ron can chime in on that. And now it's also including security. It also includes safety, lots of other things, virtual people, data management. So there is lots of other domains that even CMMI has kind of transcended beyond the traditional software development. So there, we even have controls and cybersecurity as an area, as a domain in CMMI. Ron, you got any thoughts on how we can leverage that for companies that are using already or thinking about CMMI security?
Yeah, and you bring up a couple of really good points, Chris. And the first one is, and giving some folks some real-time intel here. We're right in the middle of doing our CMMI pilots. IBM Global Consulting Services is one of those. We've got a government contracting organization based out of the US, but they're also global. And then KPMG and Infosys in India and elsewhere. It's literally a global footprint that we're doing these pilots on. And every single entity we're talking to cannot utter the word software development without also including security and data management. It's just part of their lexicon now. And they, as world-class companies, recognize you can't have one without the other. IBM is pushing itself, and very much so, as recognized globally as one of the world's leading companies in systems and software as a service. And that's what they offer in a lot of their consulting platforms. They're building AI into literally every step along the way of the life cycle, which from a cybersecurity perspective introduces additional vulnerabilities, potential threats, potential security breaches and everything, but in a much more rapid time frame. So the need for these things to be looked at holistically together, and you remove the idea that security and cybersecurity is another potential bargaining chip in a contract, just saying, okay, we could scope that out. Not anymore. No one can do that. The risk is too great. The legal penalties, everything. We're just seeing it all over the news. It's almost ubiquitous now to know that there's going to be some sort of breach or something. And people just take it like, oh yeah, big deal. That's just what it is. That's where we are. AI is going to make that even more alarming and more risky, but also more ability to address it faster. So I think as we look forward to that, I think to see what CMMI is doing to recognize that it is broader. And I would say even with CMMC, right? CMMC is relying on the assessments and the POAMs and everything else. We have this continuous mindset in CMMI that this is always built into how you do your work. It's not something you do as part of an assessment activity or to get ready. To Kevin's point, integrate your processes and just say, this is how we do business. Bring on the appraisal, bring on the audit whenever you want to, because we're already doing it this way. And the outputs from our process demonstrate that. So we don't have to worry about it. When I was at the Down in Arlington, Virginia this last fall, there was a big event around CMMC, and Travis was there, and they had several other people speaking. In their last panel session, one of the guys was basically a government lawyer, and he basically said, we're going to start seeing false claims action suits from companies who are getting appraised to CMMC but aren't really doing it. We've solved that problem in CMMI for them if they would actually just listen and do what we've told them around sustaining habit, persistence, governance, the stuff that Kevin talked about. You've already got these solutions in your CMMI portfolio. Extend them, integrate them, you're done. And you don't need to worry about preparing for appraisal then.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And you bring up a great point there, Ron. And one of my pet peeve kind of thing has been, why did we let go of the maturity processes, sustaining and habit and persistence in version 1.0, 2.0, right? And Kevin rightly put it, the sneaked out some of the stuff with version 2 for industry demand or what have you. But that's one of the strong points in CMMI. We bring out the governance, we bring out the sustenance, and also we bring out the fact that management support not just doing it for the compliance part and check the box part. And we've solved that for 30 years now in CMMI, right? Kevin, you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Ron's point about data management because I think it's a really important one. And it also highlights an issue I see when I first go into work with organizations and we're trying to scope. So if you think about fundamentally in data management in CMMI, it's answering the question, what do I consider my data and where is it at all times, whether it's being stored, transported, or processed from the CMMI perspective. In the CMMC specifically, we want to know where your CUI is stored, processed, and transmitted, right? And one of the first questions we ask them is, can you provide us a data flow diagram so we can understand where your data is? And a lot of organizations struggle because they don't think about where it's stored and processed. Meaning it may be on-prem or it may be off-prem, but they don't really think about it as, I just get the data. And that's a huge problem initially when scoping. There's so many organizations that I have to tell them, you also have to include this in your scope because it's being processed over there. So they don't understand where the data is flowing because they're not managing the data. And that is very important for CMMC.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Kevin. Well, I think, we've covered a lot of good points. I mean, the commonality, the need for sustaining habit and persistence, which goes beyond just check the box. We do see a lot of an exponential rush in companies wanting to get certified to CMMC. Obviously, it's a law, but that brings up a good point that Ron said, that there will be a huge bunch of people that'll probably get check the box and then realize they're not really resilient from a cyber perspective, which is what the DoD wanted anyways. And then it's going to spread through its cracks in the supply chain. We hope we don't get to that situation. That kind of brings us into risk management, cybersecurity risk management. We've already talked, Kevin, about how risk management is very well addressed in CMMI. It's also there as it applies to cyber in CMMC. The risk-based approach to cybersecurity and applying it in terms of making it a culture and accountability added onto it, right? And that is really part of the sustaining habit and persistence, like we have said. Where do you think organizations that are starting this, and maybe they're familiar with CMMI, maybe they're not, and they got introduced to CMMC because someone said you have to do this to be in business? Where do they start, Kevin? And how can they say that, hey, there's other models which this is foundationally built on, and be able to understand that? And how should they kind of realize the value beyond just check the box thing, which is really what a compliance regime tends to be?
Well, both CMMI and CMMC both talk about taking a risk-based approach.
Yeah.
And when you're first getting started in this, you really have to take a serious look at where and from where are my biggest risks coming from. Now, if you're a large company, a Lockheed and Northrop's, one of the big defense contractors, your biggest risks probably come from, other actors and things like that. But the smaller companies where a lot of these folks are really getting involved for the very first time. The bigger companies have been doing this for years. It's your people, right? And, we talk about insider threats, and I don't mean insider threat in a bad way. It's insider threat in that people do things inadvertently because they don't understand,
Yeah.
and I'll give you an example that everybody I think can resonate with. Everybody has a bank account. And if you go into your banking online, they offer you this laundry list of things that you can put in place that limits the amounts, gives you alerts, does all sorts of things, right? Multi-factor authentication, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's all there to protect your information. It's all basic stuff and it's all very simple. But they don't think about people. Well, people might actually steal my money. So they don't put it in place. And I talk to people every week that they get hacked. And, the usual hacking is somebody comes in, makes a small withdrawal. If you don't react to it, then they steal your bank account. But if you have those little things in place, you'd see the indicator, you'd immediately take action, and the bad outcome would never occur. Same thing for small companies. Start with some basic, risk management, insider threat training, security awareness, just on the little things. Another good one for little companies is tailgating, right? I have to badge in. And what do? I'm a courteous person. I let the other 3 people in. I hold the door for them. Well, from a courteous thing, that's a nice thing to do. From a security perspective, that's an awful thing to do. Make them all badge in. I know it's mean, but you got to do it, right? And it's just little hygiene things like that for small companies that really would get them started, reducing their risk posture, and getting that culture, start to inculcate the culture in the organization.
Wow, excellent points, Kevin. Excellent. And that reminds me of awareness and training, which is an area in CMMC and a domain in CMMC, which covers insider threat, like you said. And at the same time, organizational training in CMMI, another area right there. And you apply the cyber part and cyber training and all that, and that takes care of CMMI too. So there's so many connections between the models and the assessment method and the way we do it. Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. The last thing I want to discuss is future outlook. A lot of companies are looking for what are you guys doing to make the models talk, so to speak, right? And Ron hit on this a little bit earlier about reciprocity, whether it may happen or not. But what are some of the other things? AI. We hear data, we hear security and safety being discussed in every AI summit, every AI discussion. That's part of why I think in CMMI we made security to be mandatory, to be looked at for companies wanting to use the AI domain. Ron, what do you have to talk about? How are we evolving, let's say, the CMMI, because we can talk about that. We're deeply involved in that, in how to make it more friendly or, develop some materials that'll make it easily kind of digestible, so to speak, for companies that also want CMMC. And we're seeing, initial adopters being companies that are in IT services, for both models.
Well, one of the things that we've done that we're getting really positive feedback on, and this is with the AIM program. So again, artificial intelligence maturity with CMMI, and that's right now in its current version, which we're going to update prior to launch in June. More than half of the model has AI content now embedded in it. And that introduces several things to the mixture. One is it automatically means that from a model perspective, we're going to have to accelerate what Kevin was talking about earlier. We're going to have to accelerate our releases to keep up with the trends because they're changing in weeks now and months versus years and stuff. The things that we're seeing from that, to pull on another thread that Kevin said related to what we're doing with AIM. Think about this. What we do now, what you guys just described about awareness and training of the people, the insider threat things, we're training our people to have that cybersecurity, security mindset in everything they do. You have to do the same exact thing to the digital labor too. And that's a new term we're adding into the model as part of the content. This idea of digital labor, you've got to train all the large learning modules, everything out there that AI is dependent on, they have to be trained as well. And there has to be a human in the loop verifying it, builds into those processes from that holistic point of view. And it does one other thing that I'm not sure CMMC has quite tackled yet, but it's behind every issue that we're hearing from particularly the small and medium companies that Kevin alluded to, it's costly for them to do all these things.
Yeah.
Every one of these things is an additional cost to their G&A and overhead that they have to put into their wrap rates that go back to the federal government. And all of a sudden they're going to start looking at like, we can't compete anymore. And how do you get around that? Well, you take an approach that integrates this together with one approach, one open architecture. And that's what we've done with CMMI. We've got these things now we call crosswalks. So we have crosswalks within AIM to ISO 42001, 23894, and 23053, and ISO 31000. They're machine learning, they are AI systems and risk management, all bundled together in those 4 crosswalks. We have a quick start guide for those. So anyone you want to go through, if you're going to have to do 42001 and you have CMMI in place, you've already got your solution right there in front of you with this quick start guide. We have in our roadmap to do the same thing with CMMC, where we're going to provide these crosswalks for people to be able to go in and say, okay, I'm a company, I've already been using CMMI. How do I get to CMMC faster, better, cheaper? And in a way that I can leverage what I've already done with my investment. We've solved that for them. And I think with what we're doing with AIM, it has even more potential because it will speed up a lot of the processes. We're seeing organizations, the AI agents create the use cases, and then a human expert verifies them. But that cuts down that cycle time so much. It's literally from months down to days. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing. Flip that argument and that concern, and you open up the vulnerability for any error in data, any error in leaking CUI or FCI in the AI. What do you do about that? That's already out in the wild then, is by the time it's in one of these systems, if it's not closed. CMMC is going to have to address it, and I think CMMI can help them fix that and address it going forward. There's an opportunity for both to do this together, is really the way I look at it. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's look at them together, but recognize from the business perspective, there's a cost to this. How do I minimize my lift, my effort, my overhead, and maximize the output so I am cyber resilient? I do have good maturity in my AI implementation and in everything else I do as a business.
Yeah, absolutely, Ron. I think that brings out great connections there, future outlook. And I almost think the takeaway from all this is if you use the CMMI as your framework for governance, for improvement, for maturity and performance improvement, as it's been for so many years, treat cybersecurity almost like a subset. And I think, you'd be much more, and then power it with the 110 controls we have in CMMC. It's going to be an easier journey. And I'm seeing this with companies that I work with. The ones that are best prepared are the ones that already know CMMI, and whether they do it, whether they have implemented it really well, are the ones that get there much easier because they understand the importance of putting a process, following it, implementing it, sustaining it, right? And we've solved that problem in CMMI for a long time. I think harmonization is the only way to go, especially with AI and safety and security and data coming in. So, gentlemen, I think we've got great excitement building with AI and with cybersecurity. These are the 2 top professions, I guess, other than the medical profession and healthcare, that is going to be the top for college graduates and whatnot in the next 20 years. So I think it's happening. It is now. And I think we'd urge organizations on this opportunity to make the best of both models and harmonize them. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here and taking your time. Appreciate it. And always, always happy to talk to you. Thank you both.
Thanks, Chris. Let me put in a shameless hucksterism plug to anybody wanting to find out more on those 3 topics: medical devices, CMMI and AIM, and cybersecurity. Those are the 3 key themes that we're going to be seeing in June in the Washington, D.C. event, where we're doing our next conference, 2026. Let us know if you need. You can reach to me directly or Chris or any of us, and we'll be able to give you the links for that information. So thank you again for having us, Chris. Always good to talk with you guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks a lot and appreciate it.